So each day I wrestle with the question, does the progressive centre have a demand problem or a supply problem? In other words, are we failing because we're offering something the voters don't want, or because we're failing to offer what they do want? Do they want the progressive centre or do they not want it? Are we offering it or are we not offering it? And my conclusion, though I constantly revisit it, is that we have a supply problem. It's a commonplace that we live in an era of authoritarian populism. The evidence seems clear. Right-wing leaders ride the anger over immigration, globalization and trade, whipping up discontent, demonizing opponents, making sure that they offend liberal sensibilities. The election, President Trump, Brexit, a UK government now with a thumping Conservative majority, European writers on the march, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Duterte in the Philippines, the list goes on. And there is at least some consensus around the origins of the populism: the financial crisis, immigration, communities and people feeling left behind by globalization, an out-of-touch elite tone-deaf to people's concerns, and of course, the revolutionary phenomenon of social media. Politics is polarized, media is fragmented, even facts are contested. Our societies are splitting into two worlds, which don't talk to each other, listen to each other, or frankly, much like each other. So this critique is well understood in Western liberal politics, but there is an underlying assumption on part of the left that the electorate are driven by this dissatisfaction to desert the rational in favor of the irrational by voting for populists. And this assumption, I believe, is lazy, complacent, and profoundly lacking in self-criticism. The challenge of liberal democracy, in my view, is efficacy. It is the feeling that in the face of problems people want addressing, the prevailing powers will prevaricate, procrastinate, perambulate, but never prosecute. People feel that their world is changing without their consent and beyond their control, and they want someone to fix it. And the populists are answering that call. People want things to move, to change. Their leaders not to sit in front of the wall in endless contemplation, but to punch through it, if necessary to offend in order to deliver. They want to see the job done. And the more the leader is surrounded by opponents shouting and reveling in vehement denunciation, the more that leader appears to them to be validated. And in response, the left has in two camps. The first camp represents the incarnation or reincarnation rather of the old left. They share the basic desire for radical change. They too say the system is rigged, and they feel that the moment they've spent a lifetime waiting for has finally arrived. And they're bolstered by a young generation of radicals with an agenda that they believe can align with that old agenda. The second camp are those that used to govern, who are appalled at the revival of the old left, preach moderation, but are derided as unexciting tinkerers in this era demanding radical change. They sound like an acoustic version of an old heavy rock anthem, better suited in a club than a stadium, and in any event, still a song from the past. So the first camp offer the wrong solution, the wrong sort of change, and the other offer too little change. I spoke recently at the occasion of the Labour Party's 120th birthday, and I spoke of the four walls of impotence within which progressive politics risks imprisoning itself. The first is misreading the lessons of the financial crash by believing that the public turned sharply left on economic policy and against markets as a result. In fact, people understood completely the difference between a failure of the financial markets and a failure of the entire system of private enterprise. They are anti-greed, but they're not anti-wealth. The second was mistaking acceptance of the failures of policy post 9/11 and anxiety over the high cost of military engagement for a belief that the West was essentially to blame for the extremism. People never believe that, and they distrust anyone who thinks it. The third is to pick up the gauntlet thrown down by the right and entertain a culture war of identity, which the progressive side is certain to lose. And the fourth is to believe that what works for the right will also work for us, so we match their populism with our own. The British Labour Party situated itself within these walls in December 2019 in our election and suffered the worst election defeat in our history. But around the Western world today, in medium-sized countries, let's say with populations over 20 million, progressive politics everywhere is on the defensive. Not one traditional left or centre-left party is in majority power. Macron won, of course, by eviscerating the old French Socialist Party, and traditional left parties are riven between moderates and left, and neither are winning. In my view, to beat populism, we have to be politically competent, strategically focused, and redefine the progressive challenge for the modern world. Redefine what being radical means. We need competence in defense and offense. For defense, we must recognize that populists exploit grievances, they don't invent them. The grievances are real and rational. There is a problem with immigration, if not properly controlled. Showing you will control it is the only way you get permission to advocate it. Tough action against those who threaten our security and way of life is justified. The primary duty of government is to keep people safe. Pride in your country is not something to be despised, but to be celebrated. And a culture which, for example, means that elements within our universities and on campus no platform people with whom they disagree, when by no reasonable definition could the disagreement be said to be outside the bounds of legitimacy, this repels normal people. And they won't elect leaders who they think will be intimidated by such behavior. And it's no good saying it's a tiny minority. These issues have immense cut-through. Very often I hear progressive politicians speak to the narrow activist audience for the cheers, but not to the majority of people in words that earn their silent approval. So these are basic points of culture, which, if you're not touching, you're not listening. What's much more difficult is to play offense, to say what is the positive that gets us support. And here the challenge is economic. Stagnant incomes and a sense of breach in the generational promise, i.e. the next generation will do better than this one, have led to disillusion about today and pessimism about tomorrow. Hence the desire for radical change. But don't underestimate the public's intelligence. They want change that is practical. Those leading tough lives are wary of people promising revolutions, and those who are more comfortable don't want the revolutions anyway. Start with the real world. Analyze that without preconception, and it is clear that whichever government is in power will be dealing with a 21st century technology revolution every bit as game-changing as the 19th century industrial revolution. And unfortunately, right now, policymakers and change makers are in two different worlds. So here is the 21st century progressive task: to harness technology for economic and social change in a manner which promotes fairness, social justice, and opportunity. That is the challenge of radical politics today. It requires mobilization of government, federal and local. Individuals need to be educated and empowered to succeed in the new world of work, and they can't do that on their own. And if properly understood and used, this technological revolution can cut the cost of essential services whilst at the same time improving their quality. And it is completely in tune with green politics. The environment is no longer a single issue, stacked alongside all the others. It's pervasive, it's universal, it's about life choices, it's a whole political philosophy. It is perfect for the renaissance of progressive politics, but only if allied to realistic policy. So green politics itself is at an interesting political juncture. Green so-called New Deals, both sides of the Atlantic, which join forces with far-left economics, endanger the very cause they claim to champion. Instead, it would be better to learn from, for example, the German green experience, which is making huge electoral strides, largely because it's perceived as advocating radical change whilst moving with the grain of the market and working with private enterprise. The doubling of Africa's population and India taking its rightful place at the table of economic giants will mean that there is no answer to climate change other than finding ways of consuming sustainably, which in turn means the acceleration of science and technology. So that should be our ambition. And it should be done practically in a way which maximizes unity in our countries. So in conclusion, those who want to make the case for radical change make it best not by setting people against each other, but by showing that shared purpose and common endeavor advances us all together. The more reasonable our demeanor, the more palatable the radical change. A leftist populism is wrong in principle and self-destructive politically. We win from the progressive side when we address the future in the language of reason. So there is an irony in the progressive predicament. Progressive values aren't the problem. Sensibly applied, they're popular. We are too often the problem. Our outrage inhibits our thought. Our attachment to ideological purity obscures our understanding. And our self-discipline is in perpetual coalition with our propensity for self-indulgence. So my judgment is very clear. We will defeat the populism when we weave a new narrative of optimism about the future by understanding the future and embracing it. The challenge, therefore, is ultimately one of our character and our will. Thank you.